Yeah, it's nice and warm. We're missing Jan Merrily,
Yes.
and Ann Van is here, but she's out in her car attending to some urgent something or other, but she will be in soon, hopefully.
You can, I don't know if you can see. Oh yeah, you can see we've got a fire going down there. Am I turned on?
Yep, I'm just going to turn on the recording and then we're all good.
Recording in progress.
Oh. I kind of scan, if I scan the screen, I can get a quick sense of how many climate zones we're spanning.
Can you work that out? Climate zones.
There's people who are bundled up in woolen hats and thick sweaters and sleeping bag coats and and then there's others that are stripped right down to a cotton top.
From Boise to Queenstown.
Yeah. So let's sit for a few minutes. As we're sitting, I've got this image of people driving in cars to get here, or driving in their skin encapsulated physiologies to get here. Okay? And it's very handy when you're driving a car to have the doors and the roof and the wheels stay on. If you know what I mean, right? You kind of hold it, you want it to hold together while you're going somewhere. But when you get there, you can just open the doors, right? And you may or may not get out, right? Because you're there. It no longer matters anymore. If the car, good morning, if the car completely falls apart, once you've got there, it's okay. Okay? You don't want it to fall apart while you're still going there. So let's sit for a moment. You're here. We've arrived, right? Imagine for a moment we just sit down into this living that is happening. And I don't know what living is happening for you, especially the people who I just see images on screens. But I don't really know what the living is for you, even for the people who are in this room, right? Because part of the living for you carries associations and relationships with people I don't even know, with places I've never even been to. Okay? And yet we're all here. Okay? And maybe the car, sometimes it's like, nowadays modern cars are getting more enlightened. You know what I mean, right? The old cars were built out of steel, right? They rusted like crazy, but they're really heavy. Modern cars are mostly plastic, right? It's all kind of plastic. Sure, it's much lighter, right? So it's getting kind of lighter thing, but it's still a kind of skin that we're happy to hold together whilst to enable us to get somewhere. Right? A skin of aspiration. Right? A skin of expectation. Right? But just for a moment, whisper into your heart, I have arrived, I am here. And then just sit and let the walls of the vehicle become transparent, translucent, right? That there's osmosis can happen across the membrane, right? Inside to outside, outside to inside. And it's been a long journey getting here. And you finally arrived here, because here is always where you're going to. And so of course, I've arrived, and I smile. And before the next sort of journey takes place, I recognize that I'm breathing. It's just, I've always been breathing. I had this smiling and breathing. And as I recite some words of aspiration, see if you can allow these words to reverberate in the kind of tactile, kinesthetic, felt sense of your existence. Right? Not just a kind of a verbal concept. Can you invite these, the meaning, the hints behind this imagery, and feel it reverberating in your experience? We take refuge in love and clear seeing. We live courageously in this world of birthing and dying. Our hearts embrace all companions on this path of lucidity and freedom. However innumerable beings are, I aspire to meet them with kindness and interest. However inexhaustible the states of suffering are, I vow to touch them with patience and love. However immeasurable the dharmas are, I vow to explore them deeply and thoroughly. However incomparable this mystery of interbeing, I vow to surrender within it freely. From this day forth, with wisdom and compassion as my lamp and staff, I dedicate all my life energies to the welfare of all beings. Sadhu. Sadhu. I just have to strip down a bit. This is not a hot flush, this is just a flush of hot. I'd like to try to begin this morning a little bit differently than we have in the past. It's always different, but and today, for those of you that are joining us on the screen, you might not realize, well actually we've got a few less people on the screen, but we've also got considerably less people in the room. And I think that partly it's New Zealand's being visited right now by a second wave of COVID plus flu. And I know that that's kind of knocked a few people out from coming. Right? So I'd like to, we've been considering this question last time we met. We raised this question of a kind of community or a communion of eco-sattvas, right? A kind of green dharma community, a kind of bodhisattva community, right? And the sense that we find ourselves in the midst of all of this, and we've been looking at the very traditional, but perhaps in a slightly less traditional way, path of the bodhisattva, path of the eco-sattva, path of an awakening being. And each time we've met for the last number of months this year, I've kind of reviewed the whole year. And I have a little reluctance to review the whole year yet again. And yet I know there's new beings with us this time, and I'm hoping that something can be relevant. Even though I'm not going to review the whole year. Right? But I'd like to, before we go a bit further and consider this topic, which is actually, I believe actually a topic that is a source of massive angst and struggle for beings. And that is the topic of skillful use of energy, right effort. Making an effort. Of course, it causes a lot of distress, because the flip side is I'm lazy, I don't have any motivation. There's that side of it, and this is this kind of rather difficult, quite simple, but rather difficult topic I'd like to consider today. But first of all, I'd just like to have a space, invite a space, to see if there are many of you are actually been quite consistent with this thread of classes, and it's been in my own mind, I've been finding that even though we just meet briefly once a month, and the ideas are rather simple, I suspect actually that these simple ideas could keep us quite busy and quite focused and full of good juicy work, right, for the period of the month. And I'd like to just start this morning and just see if there are any observations or even whether they kind of drift towards being a question or not. It doesn't matter. Kind of observations, discoveries, recognitions that might be emerging, particularly for the people who've been relatively consistent with this thread of gatherings. What's emerging for you? What's meaningful for you? I'm quite aware that if you live in America, right, somewhere in the mandala of your life is the Supreme Court. There's other stuff going on. It's not just a group of people sitting down having Buddhist classes and doing their Sunday Buddhist practice. There are whole other considerations that are going on and are major parts of our life. And somehow to be able to take this in hand and make it a path of awakening for ourselves rather than feeling that it's a disruption and a problem of awakening for ourselves. Okay? So maybe if any of you who are on the screen or the small number of people in the room, could you open a door or something, Mary? I'm inviting you for breakfast. We're having poached tarchan brains for breakfast. It's the heat here. So wave your hand if you're, right? Otherwise, we're just going to sit together for a while. Because what else is there? Susan,
So, Tarchan, your description of patience last time as like a cat waiting has changed everything that I do, not just in meditation, but in the way I approach my whole life. I've always used patience as a kind of endurance, which you said it isn't. And it's not like I've gone 180 degrees, but it's like it comes back to me probably 8-10 times a day, what this meaning of patience actually is. That was so wonderful for me.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that.
Luis wanted to speak.
Oh, Luis? Good morning.
Hello, Tarchan, and thank you so much for this thread of teachings. When you said the refuge prayer about we take refuge in love and clear seeing, and love throughout this idea of taking refuge in love, and the idea of love and its relation to my practice has been a very juicy journey for me, in terms of, and probably relates to this right effort as well, like where am I coming from, my intentions. And I have so much judgment and then I have so much beating myself up for having judgment. So the parami, I kind of have this dance of my own relationship with love in terms of being able to love others on the bodhisattva path. So I just wanted to it's an ongoing thing. It's very deep for me. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you very much. I really appreciate being a part of this. And I guess also my question is, does love relate to absolute bodhicitta? Are they the same thing in terms of unconditional love? Because, so anyway, I have big questions around all of that. Thank you.
Just a small little comment, not an answer to a question or anything, but when you speak of it in those terms, does love relate to bodhicitta? It kind of brings out a common experience, I think, for a lot of people, and that is that we kind of accept these terms like bodhicitta or dharmakaya or this, that, or the other, right? Awakening and so on, and as if somehow there's some reality there that needs to be reached or realized or achieved or something, and we want to check out, have I got it right? Do I understand it right? Have I done this? When in actual fact, maybe it would be more useful, might be a huge breakthrough in our being, if we could somehow grasp the experience of love, unconditional love, or whatever it is, our experience of it, not our concept of it, whatever our experience is, right? It's not, I'm not judging it one way or the other. It's like everyone experiences in a different way. And then, in a sense, takes hold of that with confidence, that this is the most useful way of walking at this stage in my life, and forget about whether it's the real bodhicitta or not. Instead of trying to kind of fit our life into the Buddhist categories as if somehow, you know, like if I say, oh yes, it is absolute, oh great, I've got it. But actually, you don't have anything at that moment. Bodhicitta is a concept. It might come with a kind of tactile, kinesthetic, engulfing, whole being experience, but it might not, right? And love might have a kind of, you don't have a very good intellectual, I mean, people have spent their lifetimes, you know, there's just like human beings have devoted incredible amounts of time trying to define love, and they can't, right? Or it always feels unsatisfactory. Good morning. We get close to it, right? But it's kind of unsatisfactory. But hopefully we know the presence of loving in our living. We might not be able to define it, we might not be able to name it, or whether, you know, is that the same as this? It's like as if somehow it's a translation exercise. And I think in a way this does come a little closer to the fourth parami, which we'll talk today. Yeah. Oh, Diana?
Hello, Jen. It's nice to connect with you again.
Good morning, or good afternoon.
I find myself, I find the words and the experiences of what we're sharing in these sessions extremely valuable. And what I keep coming back to is refuge. And my sense of refuge seems to change depending on whatever is arising and is challenging. But underneath the searching for refuge is it's hard to put into words, but it's just this sense that you often come back to, of feet solidly placed on the ground, and in the midst of a tornado of movement and whatever is going through on some level somewhere, who knows where, that I find myself finally getting a sense of what refuge is when I just stop for a minute and look around the room and feel my feet and my body and whatever is happening, whether I'm making tea or just being there. And the thought comes up, there's absolute calm here. There's no tornado. It's peaceful. There's nothing happening here. And then I'll go back into it again, whatever it is. And then it just goes back and forth between this sense of movement and getting completely overwhelmed in it, not knowing what it is, no labels, and then coming back to this sense of just being present. And that to me is love, and that's bodhicitta, and that's whatever else you want to call it, because it's beyond thought, it's beyond anything, it's just presence, being here. At least that's what I've found so far.
Thank you. At the beginning of the class, I made this kind of simplistic little idea of driving in a car, you know, with walls on the car and everything, and so now you're here, and so now you can let it go. But actually, you're never here. You're always going. The here is a going. The here is a moving. It's a process, right? It's and you know, I think it's like we to actually feel at home in the ongoing process of this mystery of living that we are. Okay. Well, actually, if you're seeking refuge somewhere else other than that, I don't know that we're ever going to get there. We may call it love, but that's only because it's useful. We want to communicate it with someone else. Sometimes the someone else is ourself. But sometimes we don't need to communicate it with someone else, so we don't have a name for it. It's a kind of no-name love. Right? We take refuge in love, and maybe we should extend this, like, instead of clear seeing, maybe we need to add clear seeing appreciation. Right? Just to have a sense that it's constantly changing. I mean, even my clear seeing, I clearly see my fogginess. I clear, right? Whereas if I think I can appreciate clearly this ongoing flow. Okay?
Just have a comment.
Yes. Can you speak up, Mary?
Yeah, no, somewhere in this flow, there needs to be meaning for the human psyche. And because as soon as something becomes meaningless, there's a grasping, there's a what does this mean? What does this mean sort of thing. And so maybe that comes in the appreciation area, but even my attempt to categorize it in the appreciation area, like the person's attempt to categorize it as bodhicitta, it seems like such a normal human thing that we do. Anyway, it's just a comment.
I think, Janet, you were waving your hand a few moments ago.
There we go. Couldn't find the unmute button. I just wanted to say, Tarchin, that
you've gone muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I mean, there's a theme running through these classes about you know, I wrote down, for example, Tarchin is inviting us to take these themes to heart and live them, make them true in your living. And I that's been my strongest experience this year, is somehow that is, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm constantly paying more attention to living the paramis, or you know, or the refuges, taking them into my living. And that's been a really rich exploration. And that question of yours that I have often heard now really makes sense to me. It's kind of related to that, which is, you know, what on earth is going on here? Yeah. So that it's a kind of an increase in ongoing exploration in the life. And yeah, that's what these classes have brought to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Hi. I was listening to your talk last time online on YouTube.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, you talked about poised readiness.
Yes.
And you talked about patience, which I found really interesting. And I know there's difference in terminology and things like that, semantics, but for me, that really struck a chord when I consider awareness, and something that Thich Nhat Hanh said about we need to know the mind. You know, we need to notice. We need to be able to know our minds. And in my own experience, I've struggled a little bit with watching the mind, but also so having that awareness, that poised readiness maybe, but also trying to not be too left brain focused with it all. Does that make sense? Kind of, so not too logical and analytical,
Mm-hmm.
But try and bring it back to having a bit more of an embodied experience of awareness and knowing and watching the mind.
I wonder if I mean, that touches on something Mary was saying. I mean, the need for our experience to be meaningful. And we're constantly trying to, I believe, that creatures are constantly in the process of making sense of their experience. You know, in whatever way, you know, and humans involves a lot of sophisticated language, kind of conceptual language. But our cat is making sense of her experience. You know, the mosquito is making sense of the experience. It's hard for us to make sense of how they make sense of it. You know, it's such a huge jump, right? But in a sense, when we can make sense of the experience, it feels meaningful, right? And when we can't make sense of it, we say, "Oh, it doesn't, nonsense. It doesn't make sense," you know. And the advantage of making sense of the experience is sometimes that gives us our own kind of leverage and reminder of how to remember the non-conceptual side of it, experience. Okay? And this is in a way where many people would find the parami to be extraordinarily valuable. It's almost like you think about this, it starts to make sense, and then there's days when you've completely neglected. There's no generosity going, wholesome relations out the window, patience, forget it, right? All these kind of things. But you have on other occasions made sense of this, and you begin to realize, right, in a kind of visceral way. I don't mean like a realization that you could talk about to somebody else, but it's a kind of an increasing competence and confidence, a kind of inner certainty that at the base, even though in the midst of all this change, in the midst of all the swirling and the tornado and so on, right, this I know in my core is true. And if it's not true, it doesn't matter, I don't care, I'm going to live this anyway. Right? And you know, there's a long poem that I wrote quite a few years ago, and I want to change the title now because the title's become so jargoned and used by everybody, right? But at the time it felt fresh, and the title was "We're in this together. We're all in this together." Right? And it begins, "I am animate. I am an animal. I am born from life and living, and so, dear friend, are you. Everything we experience reverberates with these truths." Okay? And, you know, to be animate is to be moving. Right? Right? We are I mean, plants are animate too. Right? But I'm writing the poem really for humans. I didn't really expect Greg Code, our cat, to read the poem, right? So I said referring to humans, right? So I'm saying animal, The cat would go, oh yeah, I'm an animal too. But if the plant sort of was reading the poem, it would go, well, what about me? Right? But we could include the plant as well. I am animate. I am an animal. Right? And you think of like the degree to which when you're more animate or when you're less animate, when you're extremely less animate, like the kind of extreme of non-animation for the human being, and it's so dramatic and it's so incredible that we've graced it with its own term and we call it a corpse. It's kind of rigor mortis. There doesn't seem to be any animateness about it. It just kind of lies there. And it may bubble and do things, but you realize that's just other guys who are coming into the festive board and banqueting, right? So you might have maggots in there and kind of juicy burbles and all kinds of gases giving off as the corpse gradually melts back into the wider ecosystem, right? And that's animate because the bacteria is alive. And the maggots are alive, but the human being is now a corpse, right? It's just decorpsed. And so you think about it, animate, sometimes we're approaching corpse. Right? Think of the times when you become really depressed, really miserable, really, there's a whole kind of, there's a scale, if you like, of going from like incredibly refined, responsive movement, animateness, right, through to increasingly frozen, right? And it happens physically, it happens emotionally, it happens mentally, right, all the way through. And so the parami are working with, they're for animate beings, and the kind of the first parami is this recognition. It dawns out of the recognition that all of this, right, and so dear friends are you. I am animate, I am an animal, I am a dancing of giving and receiving. Generosity is like in our aliveness. It's in harmony with being alive. You could say that the corpse, Warwick gave us the gift of refusing to allow his body to be treated with any chemicals or anything like that, and it had to stay in this rather hot summer sunroom, right, for 3 or 4 days, and after a while it was pretty pongy, right. So you could say, well, he's still giving off. He's giving stink, but actually he wasn't, right? That was the bacteria and the other stuff that was giving the stink, right? That actually generosity stops when we stop. Think of it, right? And so when you're kind of trying to return to your aliveness, to your core, to your base, the first thing, it's easy to grasp. I can see, I'm being stingy today. I'm being more generous. Am I generous, right? A generosity of spirit. And it leads so naturally into, it doesn't lead like a line, but it leads in terms of like expanding into the whole field of wholesome relating. Right? Relating, like, okay, we're going to give, receive. Now, how can I do this through speech, through bodily substance, through action, through food exchange, right? Through all these, and so wholesome relating starts to become extraordinarily, it's not an add-on, it's not a should or this is a holy thing to do. We begin to realize in a deep way that this is part of living well. And then, of course, we meet with occasional hiccups and difficulties on the path, right? As I said, right? You put the seeds in the garden, and you go out the next day, and the carrots aren't there. Right? And you discover, right, how impatient you are, because somehow all the different creatures and different situations have different rhythms of giving, receiving. That's what it is. It's different rhythms of giving, receiving. Like when we feel that we're really deeply attuned to someone, right? It feels trite then to say we love them. It's almost like we're so attuned that we don't even bother with the word love. Right? And there's a kind of a giving, receiving. There's a generosity of giving, and there's also a generosity of receiving that's going, and we kind of move together like this. Right? This wholesome relating. And it feels good. Right? It works. And then patience, right, arising as we begin to realize that somehow it feels like I'm a little bit out of tune. This person's coming in and they're dancing with a bum ba dum ba dum bum bum, and this other person's dancing with dum da da dum da da dum da da dum da da dum bum ba dum bum bum dum ba da dum ba da dum. You know, we're going to go, you know, a Haydn waltz or something, and then we're going to have kind of Sid Vicious, right, or whoever, right, some heavy metal kind of. I mean, there are some rhythms which I find really difficult, right, of the givings and the receivings, right? But this fluidity and patience, right, coming to a place of poised readiness, right, to kind of respond and engage with the rhythm of the moment. Right? And then growing out of that, interestingly enough, comes the fourth parami, which is what I want to speak about today, which is Virya-parami. And it's a really weirdo parami, right? Because in English, when we say we're weary, it kind of means the opposite of Virya, right? It's a kind of a bad sounding association between the Sanskrit and the English word. Right? But a vira, it's spelled with a V, right? For those of you that are not familiar with it. And virya, right, can mean like effort. It can be enthusiastic effort, right? It can be effective use of energy, skillful use of energy. Kind of the word vira or vira, right, originally meant hero. So you're talking about a kind of heroic, kind of courageous, and then it becomes very Australian. Bill, this is for you, right? Like Virya-parami is to be a battler. Isn't that what you Australians are? You know, oh, he was a real battler, you know, and you have a sense you're gonna, you got the courage to battle with the difficulties, and you kind of push through, and you know, you get on with it. Do your 100,000 prostrations, do your 100,000 mandala offerings, right? It feels like you're supposed to be a kind of a hero in doing this, and unfortunately, the word is in a sense invokes ideas which are so far away from the real meaning, the real juicy natural flow of Virya-parami, right? That it's actually, I think, a cause of suffering, right? Like people sometimes say, well, I don't seem to make enough effort in my meditation practice. I can't get myself motivated. I won't point to anyone here, right? But I've occasionally heard this from some beings, right? And, you know, and it seems like, you know, what you do is you go, oh, well, the source of this seems to be comparison. you know, you kind of compare they heroically go off and do this thing and like break through and they work, and I'm so lazy, right? So Virya-parami is actually a magnifying glass to show you your defilement of how lazy and ineffectual and kind of useless you are, right? And then you're supposed to kind of work harder. You know, I gotta work harder. So what you do, if you really want to be a serious practitioner, is you get an alarm clock. And you set your alarm clock so you get up half an hour earlier each day, you know, because religious beings get up early in the morning, right? And then you do your practice, right? And you discipline yourself. These are associations that seem to go along with it. It's kind of discipline, structure, achievement, right? This is kind of my use of energy. What am I just slothing around in my... Some of the other words that get associated with this is like enthusiastic engagement. Enthusiasm actually originally meant not that you were all kind of gung-ho, you know, with lots of likes for some place on the internet, right? But that you were actually filled with God, right? That you were kind of filled with the kind of wonderment. The difficulty with this is that people try to make effort. Making effort on the path of awakening is absolutely essential. Without making effort on the path of awakening, you won't awaken. Period. Right? The difficulty is that this effort is actually the fourth parami. I mean, it doesn't have to be lived out in this order, of course, but I'm going to present it this way. Right? That people at the beginning, they meet with the Dharma, and the first thing they think of is changing their life and making an effort to be better. Every day, you look in the mirror, every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. Right? You got a kind of positive reaffirmation, you know, you got to kind of work at it, make an effort. But you see, in the path of the Bodhisattva, it's recognized that actually you cannot harness effective use of energy and effort if you don't have a lot of other stuff together first. Right? Forget about trying to make an effort, because most of the effort you make at the beginning is completely neurotic. Your efforts just lead to taking you into a bigger and bigger mess. Better forget about that. Just practice generosity. Okay? Begin to appreciate, right, the 5 wholesome life trainings and finding a way of putting them into action. Right? So we're having an increasing tendency to meet beings with kindness and interest. We're having an increasing tendency to touch difficulties with patience and love. We're having an increasing tendency to find life interesting. Okay? And this fourth parami really begins to emerge out of a recognition. I wish I could just turn this into a nifty little translation. That would make it simple, but I can't. I have to give a whole lot of stuff here. But it's almost like we're willing, it's the point where we're willing and able to take our life, our living in hand, and make that our path of awakening. In this sense, it's kind of effortless. What else can you be? Right? It's like making an effort that's no effort. courage is part of this. Okay? It's like to have the courage, right? The kind of the heart of this. And most of the words associated with Virya, I think, are misleading. Courageous, heroic, energetic. But what about, instead of, that's why I've tended to translate this as skilled use of energy. And the other day I was thinking, well, maybe it would be better to call it, or to add to this, effective use of energy. Because have you ever noticed sometimes you pour out an awful lot of energy into something and it doesn't feel, it's not effective? Okay. Now, I just want to pause at this moment, because all I'm doing is kind of defining the fourth parami. Okay? I want to say a little bit about possibly how we might approach working with it.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Can we just pull that curtain a wee bit? The glare's really...
Yes, Mary, can you do that?
Just a wee bit. Okay,
is that all right?
That's fine. Yeah.
Good, good. Sometimes Virya-parami is called joyful effort. Yeah? I think of it sometimes as persistent, gentle, translucent nudging. There's a kind of persistent, gentle, translucent nudging. Right? That there's a kind of, you just look at it. Some days you feel absolutely flat. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like a flat tire. Like I've known this with my medical adventure of the last year or so. Right? Sometimes it feels, I said to the oncologist, I feel like I'm a tire that deflated. It's sort of like, all the energy, the oomph, right, is kind of gone out of it, and you're just flat. Right? And that's not, it doesn't feel like a very workable state. Right? And there's other times when we're bursting with energy and we don't seem to know what to do with it. But nothing kind of happens out of it. And then there's other times when we're not flat and we're not kind of bursting with this energy, and we are inside, there's a kind of an inner confidence and certainty, an inner appreciation of something in the living, right? Which we're carrying, this refuge, if you like, right? We're moving with this. And it feels like I am doing this. I am encouraging this. Okay? In the Buddhist tradition, there's this very famous collection of teachings called the Four Efforts, and they're sometimes related to Virya-parami, right? But it can be kind of a way of working with it. And very crudely, the four efforts are recognizing the wholesome when it's present, and then the second effort is taking steps to nurture it, support it, and so forth, even bring it into being when it's not there. And the third effort is recognizing the unwholesome when it's present. And the fourth effort is taking steps to alleviate it, right? To bring it to an end. Right? Now, when we look at these four efforts, we could see they could be practiced in very different ways. Right? They could be practiced at a very refined level, and they could be practiced at a very crude level. Right? So we'll talk about the crude first. Right? It's kind of at the crude level, unwholesome, wholesome. Recognize the wholesome and the unwholesome. What's wholesome? Good stuff. What's unwholesome? bad stuff. You get it, you know? It's like nothing sophisticated about this. Right? It's like it hurts. I don't like it. Right? We say, oh, it's not very wholesome. Right? It's bad for me. Do you get it? You're with this, right? So what do you do about this? Well, probably if you don't know what to do about it, it would be a really good idea to not just indiscriminately kill. Don't steal. Be a little bit more truthful, right? Many of you realize what I'm talking about. I'm referring to the 5 training precepts. Right? Really simple, right? I remember years ago, this kind of rather, I don't know what, it was a story that hit me at the time. It was many years ago. Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, a Tibetan teacher, was teaching in New Zealand. And I heard a story about him teaching down in the South Island. And when I heard the story, you may completely misunderstand this, but never mind, I'm going to say it anyway. But when I heard this story, then that led me to actually wanting to meet him. I thought, oh, this sounds like an interesting teacher, a real teacher, right? And so they were having this great kind of festive banquet, right? It's part of a sadhana, right? And they had all this food and everything, but they also had alcohol, right? They had wine and they had liquor and beer, and like it was a gigantic festive gathering food banquet, right? And apparently, one person went up to Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche and said, "Rinpoche, I thought we Buddhists weren't supposed to drink." And then apparently Namkhai Norbu said to him, "If you can't hold your alcohol, don't drink." And I thought, oh, I'd like to meet him. Not because I wanted an alcoholic path. I can't explain why I wanted to meet him. But somehow, this wasn't, he didn't just suddenly launch into a class on Abhidhamma. He just said, look, if you can't hold your alcohol, don't drink. Alcohol's unwholesome for me. Don't drink. Don't drink. Right? You get this kind of crude thing, and you get a big battle going on. And so this is where most people start their working with the 4 efforts, right? Kind of figure out an ideal of what they desire, and they try and head for that, right? Usually in a rather sloppy fashion, right? And they get themselves into trouble, and they try and get rid of that. It's very ordinary, this. So let's now make it a little bit more kind of sophisticated, right? And we start to see, well, what do I mean by wholesome? And this kind of wholeness, completeness, this space that has room for everything and everyone, right? It's like where's that scrambling at the beginning didn't have room for everything and everyone, right? It was like, this is bad, I want to get rid of it, this one, right? Wholesome, right? Somewhat whole. Maybe I emphasize this a lot, but because I found it useful for me, right? It was too dysfunctional, right, to have wholeness as my ideal, right? Because it felt impossible. Whereas I could find wholesomeness, some whole, right? I don't have to worry about having the whole, right? But just some wholesomeness, right? Moving in the direction of an increasing capacity to do what my intuition is beginning to reverberate with. I am animate. I am an animal. I am born from life and living, and so, dear friend, are you. Everything we experience reverberates with these truths. We are in this together. Right? And there's a sense of, there's times when my living eclipses that, kind of obscures that. It's not, I'm just not recognizing that. I'm not remembering that. I'm not moving as if that was true. Right? This is somewhat, not unwholesome. Forget about unwholesome as being bad stuff. Unwholesome just means fragmented. Right? There's a kind of a fragmented quality to our experience. Right? It's kind of, and so there's a sense of an increasing aspiration to recognize this kind of fragmented quality when it's there. Right? It's not a matter of judging or anything. It's just like, this is fragmented. And then gently, persistently, translucently nudging, right, this direction, in the direction of an increasing inclusiveness, right, a cohesiveness. We're kind of moving towards a kind of a cohesive thing where my body and my mind and my feelings and my emotions and my memories are cohesive. They seem to be of one piece rather than, battering each other. Now gradually, as we go more sort of deeply into this journey of inquiry, we begin to recognize that there are certain qualities, like, for example, the first three parami, which tend to, by activating that, by appreciating that, by encouraging that, it tends to bring forth a more inclusive way, a more embracive way of living, a more wholesome way of living. Right? And so we find ourselves working with, perhaps we might find ourselves working with Dana-parami, Sila-parami, Ksanti-parami, right? We're kind of, never mind the effort part. Our effort is not the effort to accomplish some fragment, but our effort is in the direction, it feels in the direction of opening the possibility of appreciating the inherent wholeness of the situation. It might become even more subtle, and we might see that what we mean by wholesome is a kind of an exquisite, delicate balance of samatha vipassana, right? And a kind of easeful presence and kind of clear, detailed appreciating, right? Interest, right? And so we maybe, this is how do I approach, how do I feed this? Okay. We're starting to more and more come close to the point where our effort is effective. Like if you think of like ineffective effort, people are trying to desperately get their sister to behave in a different way than she is. Right? You put in an awful lot of effort into this and it just doesn't seem to be very effective at all. Okay? And so, whereas actually you can if you put your effective effort into appreciating life as it actually is, how can you go wrong? There's a kind of refinement that's happening here. Maybe at the most refined levels, right? The wholesome state is simply this nectar of naturalness that you are. Right? And just in a sense, the moment we recognize that it's not there, that is the bringing of it to an end. It's very subtle. Bang, bang, bang. Right? This is Mahamudra work. to just stop here for a moment because I'm kind of throwing out a general net scheme, but I know that this is an area that, as I said earlier on in the class, that has been the source of a lot of struggle with people. How to use their energy, their life energy. How can I best use my life energy? Right? And yet this is saying, like, to move as a bodhisattva, like in tune with the world. Does this take effort? To be the wholeness that is in tune with the wholeness is effortless. Right? So in a sense, like the Virya-parami at its kind of ultimate, most complete expression is effortless flow. So this it can raise some very useful questions for us. You know, let me be personal. You know, I have found myself, unlike you beings, I have found myself sometimes in intractable, difficult situations. Okay? And it feels like if I push to the right, it causes problems. And if I push to the left, it causes problems. And if I don't push, it causes problems. It's just problems all over the place. Right? Yeah? It's kind of, and then when I recognize that, you know, this part of me goes, now, what was the best thing to do now? Okay? And I've in kind of moments of, I remember one moment, I've shared this story with a number of you before, right? It was a time, did you realize that sometimes at Dharma centers there are interpersonal problems? I don't know if any of you have ever come across this. It's quite extraordinary, actually, because you know, we know that Dharma centers are a place of beauty and peace and love and smiling and breathing and present, everything's hunky-dory. Anyway, but I've had these kind of strange moments where kind of problems and so this is a personal problem, right, that was happening. It was arising, you know, any Dharma center that has existed for decades is for sure going to have periods where they've done things right. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist. But for sure, if they've gone for decades, they would have had periods where things aren't going so well. It kind of goes like this. So Wangapeka was having a period of things not going so well, and I was part of it. Right? And I looked at it and I thought, what am I going to do? It's so obvious we should do this. What's the matter? Right? If I go right, problem. If I go left, problem. If I don't do anything, problem. Probably you've never experienced this, but it's more like confession time for me. And so, you know, in a moment, I am one of these guys that you know, yes, I study Buddhism, but I've spent an equal amount of time studying biology. I'm of a scientific kind of mind, you know, kind of sensible type of person, right? Not into this kind of spiritual, kind of gooey stuff, right? Anyway, I was so desperate. I was so absolutely desperate. I found myself, I was totally by myself, of course. I never would have done this in public. And it even though I might have done something outwardly by myself there, I'm not sure. This was what I'm describing was an inner thing. The inner part of my being said, Chenrezig, what should I do? It's quite humbling to me that I suddenly had descended to such a level, right? And then I heard this kind of voice that was a voiceless voice. I can't say it was like a deep booming voice, and it didn't sound like Namjal, and it didn't sound like me, and it wasn't really a voice. It was just a knowing And the knowing just came at that moment. It said, Tarchin, do nothing. Okay? And I thought, oh, well, it's kind of obvious because I can't do anything anyway. So I might as well do nothing. Right? And then I began to see that this was actually do no thing in particular. Do emptiness. Do shunyata. Right? Oh, how did I forget this? Okay? So we consult. We come to a point in our life where we have a problem. We might find ourselves consulting the kind of ripening repository of wisdom that's part of our own life and living. You know, you've had this from before the beginning. You know, as a fertilized egg, you knew how to get to down the fallopian tube. I mean, all the way through. You know, you don't suddenly start this kind of journey as an adult Buddhist. We're just continuously, right? It's like navigating the unknown, moving with it, right? There's some kind of the certainty that's in your life is revealed in what we do. Okay? And then we might find ourselves nudging, like how this is how I can support the wholesome in this situation. This is the way I can most effectively be with this difficult situation. This is not, the 4 efforts aren't Virya-parami. 4 efforts are maybe a doorway into working with Virya-parami. But we begin to we live courageously in this world of, that's Virya, right? The courage, right? We live with confidence, like the Virya-parami is very close to Saddha. It's a kind of like a confidence and a competence in our being, and it's like recontacting that and then moving forward. And at this point we can put some considerable, it feels like we can really harness all of our being towards this. And that might mean you're flat on your back recovering from a surgical procedure. I don't mean you're all fit and vim and vigor, but there's a sense that everything that's moving now is kind of moving in a cohesive, collaborative way, and it feels meaningful. And you're
touching it was when you were speaking about the fallopian tube, and I've been thinking about, I've been wanting to ask you, can you talk about Virya with the 30-second-old newborn baby, and I was thinking about that is the total naturalness, and there's right effort, and all the paramis are present, whether or not there's conceptualizing, it's there. And also it's linked in with animation, because I've shared with you before that the fetus that doesn't have life is much harder to give birth to. There's that dancing, there's that with the mother, the fetus that's alive coming into being the baby helps the mother tremendously, etc., etc. So the right effort is all happening. It's perfect. So it's never not being perfect, is it? Like, I'm 68, just about, and it's still perfect, but somehow I've forgotten.
Well, maybe.
Like
or maybe, I mean, that's a way of speaking. That's what I'm saying by the maybe.
Yeah.
It can be useful to think in those terms, but it can also be useful to think not in terms of forgetting something, but a kind of growing, deepening competence and confidence in something, which is now, it doesn't mean it's purely only at a kind of conscious level and the unconscious doesn't matter. but that's part of being the adult that we are. Like this kind of the inner, going back to this verse that I've shared a few times during these classes, right from the Visuddhimagga, the inner tangle and the outer tangle, this generation, this process of generating the universe is an entanglement of tangles. And so pray Gautama, who can untangle this tangle, or who can clearly see and appreciate, who can be the tangle whilst clearly seeing and appreciating the tangling? It's like in Argentina they dance the tango, but actually they dance the tangle. We're all dancing the tango, okay? And so like in a sense there's an increasing capacity of the organism to recognize that the only place to do this is in the midst of the living that I do. This is quite extraordinary. It's not the only place to do this is if I went to the East and became ordained and became a Buddhist nun or monk in a Buddhist temple in some Buddhist country. That's where I can do the real work. There's a sense of a kind of a willingness. There's the courage, the heroicness, that's there. This kind of gentle, open willingness to take to hand the life you find yourself in. And then, in a sense, when I say make that our path of awakening, I don't mean, ignore all the other things that we're learning from Dharma and Buddhist teachings and so on. And so my path of awakening is just kind of food binging and hanging out. That's not what I mean, right? But it's like I need to find the samatha and the vipassana right here. I need to find the wholeness right here. I need to find the generosity right here. And there's an increasing recognition in your being that you're not only willing to do this, but you're capable of doing it. This is the dawning of the fourth parami. It's kind of a quiet, it's not an egotistical thing, I can do all this. It's just a kind of a recognition, I tend to do this. I do tend to do this. It's a process. So, any other thoughts or questions or observations or comments? This is it's a big thing. How do you effectively use your energy in the face of a falling apart economic system, a collapsing civil discourse, political system? How do you effectively apply your effort in the face of climate change and loss of species diversity and extinctions and so on? How do you effectively apply your energy in the face of being diagnosed with a terminal illness? This is a serious question.
It's just been interesting touching from 2 points. Because everything that appears as it is has a flip side to it, whether it's a macro thing or a small thing. I mean, the questions you've just talked about are massive questions, but actually, strangely, are somehow answered on this very small, everyday way that I feel like I'm living my life. So I guess what I've enjoyed recently about the classes is this whole increasing thing about the paramis being a support for life. It's I think I'm just beginning to embrace them in that way. And strangely, it's just wonderful reminder of how to live. You know.
So it could be a reminder of a possible way of how to live.
Yeah. I mean, words and this, that, and all of the things in there, but because they're just words, aren't they? But they are words too, you know, and all of that. But I just because the question that I've had in my mind for about the last 3 weeks is, what's wisdom? You know, and
they're going to come back for the 6th parami.
Oh, right. I have to keep coming. Damn it. But so it's actually funny because things in a strange way are self-revealing, and they're not, of course. But I think it's self-answering. So I deliberately didn't try not to ask questions, but then I do. But it's just funny how I just held that question this morning, just right up, and then just that reminder, it will be answered, and it kind of has been in a sense, you know.
I mean, when you say it's just words, you know, these concepts, they're just words kind of thing. No, I'm not. I'd like to just go further. When you have like generosity, right? So it's difficult to do this kind of as a mini experiment, just bang like this.
Yeah.
But if I say, can you find the experience, the experience? Can you put yourself right now, as you're sitting here, and everyone, in wherever you are, can you get a sense of the feeling of a flow of generosity? And you know, does that have in a sense, like every cell of your body responds to pressure and decompression. It changes the metabolic process that's going on inside the cell will change when the cell's being squished or when it's being somehow it's unsquished. You know, it's kind of like there's an opening space to expand, and is it right? There's a kind of a kind of thing going on, and the cell touches other cells. It touches other substances. And in that touch, there's a squishing or an unsquishing. I'm speaking in incredibly general terms, you know, right? And then when we talk about the tactile, but then there's the kinesthetic, and it's like a sense of movement, you know, because when you are squished, you can be squished, or you can be squashed, or you can be expanded. Right? There's a kind of a rhythm that goes with a movement. You know, you can pick up the cup of tea and you can start off really fast and then slow down, or you can start really slow and then speed up, right? And if you look at it, you'll see that our body, our muscles, every time our muscles move, they're kind of rubbing against other muscles. There's tactile, but there's also a kind of a rhythm or a quality of that, right, which is moving, right? So when I talk about tactile kinesthetic, there's a kind of a felt sense of the quality of the touching and the moving that goes when the spirit of generosity is filling your being, right? And you can feel it. You might, I'll kind of see if you can feel it in your ankles. Can you feel Virya-parami in your ankles? I mean, I bet some of you have never thought of trying to explore Virya-parami, generosity, in your ankles. Right? But now try and do stingy parami in your ankles. You know, like the not generosity, but holding back, right? A kind of frozenness, going towards corpseness, right? and there's a tactile kinesthetic quality to that, you know. If you say nowadays, like in many people, you know, you could just name people, you know, you just go Putin, right? Donald Trump, right? Joe Biden, you know, I mean, you just name these people. Dalai Lama, Namja Rinpoche, right? Grey Coat, our cat, you know, and just the second you hear just the word, along with just the word goes a tactile kinesthetic reverberation through your being, right? And in a sense, the word can be useful, right? Because we can just use these words, you know, dana-parami, sila-parami, so on. We can remind ourselves. But what we're doing is we're maybe throwing the switch of a kind of a more fluid awareness, which we really have to, now we're finally coming to samadhi parami, right? And the question of meditation, like in terms of a path of the eco-sattva, the bodhisattva, we don't need any meditation so far. We're just...
Could you press the blue button at the top, George?
yeah, just a minute.
It's the big blue button.
Sorry, we're having a bit of a... Can somebody turn off their...
I got it.
Can you do that? Yeah. Okay.
That's not tuned up.
O que foi, pai?
É professor de papai, João, tá falando.
Oh, this is Felipe in Brazil. Can you mute your thing? It's just kind of...
Sorry.
That's all right. That's okay. Hello. Bom dia. Or whatever time of the day it is. Okay. Yeah, so we start to actually, you know, we could talk about the way of the bodhisattva, right? Or just eco-sattva or whatever you like, right? And you know, in a sense, effort isn't talked about. Don't bother trying to make too much effort. Just practice generosity, right? Don't bother trying to get your life, your wholesome relationships going. Just practice generosity, right? And you got, but maybe you can do generosity and it flows. The generous spirit flows into more wholesome relatings. It's not, you don't have 6 different compartments that you do. They flow one into the next, and then you can start to kind of really engage with the different domains of relating, right? That we're doing, right? And then a realistic recognition of patience. Like, what's the tactile kinesthetic sense of poised readiness? Are you meditating? No, this is not meditation. This is just noticing the tactile. This is just being animate, being an animal, born from life and living I exist born out of the living that I am. And so do you. Right? Everything we experience reverberates with this absolutely unavoidable fact of collaborative engagement. I can't choose to not engage collaboratively. I'm helping you, right, be a nasty person. I mean, it's not just nice stuff, collaborative engagement. We collaboratively engage with each other and produce hell on earth. But the collaborative engagement is not optional. We're animate. That's the very core of our being. And so you're going, well, okay, I'm starting to know this in my core. How do I work with this? Right? And I begin to recognize that these I can encourage this quality of patience that goes with the relationships, that goes with the generosity. And now I can actually kind of work with this even more directly now with the effort, because it's becoming clearer. I know what I'm doing. I'm not just trying to get rid of that or trying to get rid of it. It's kind of subtle, right? And it gradually starts to move into a kind of into the realm that we might call meditation. And actually, it's such a big field. We'll be speaking about that a lot more as we go along. Any further observations? I think that's...
Tarchin?
Yes.
Tarchin?
We're oh, Brendan. Yeah. Bearded Brendan.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you to everyone. Question on the connection here to effort and effortlessness. A student that Nicole and I have been teaching has had a lot of difficulty with visualization. And he mentioned recently meditation. He was taught before in India, meditation should be effortless. And I mentioned, well, it takes effort to move into effortlessness.
Yes.
Could you touch on that a bit more, and how a way to guide a student that is having difficulties with visualization practice?
This is where I find it useful to say, forget about effort, and just say persistent, gentle, translucent nudging. Right? I mean, it's the same thing. This is making an effort, but you're kind of changing the emphasis, right? Because it's like, you need to make great effort to get to the effortless. It doesn't necessarily help us at a certain stage in the journey, right? And what helps us to discover this effortless effort is effortless effort comes out of a confidence in our own being. I don't mean I am confident in my being, but I exude confidence. In like, I'm not kind of wishing I was somewhere else or something else. Okay, this is it. I'm grasping my life. It doesn't take any effort to grasp the living that I am, because the living that I am is grasping the living that I am. It's kind of, in a sense, effortless, right? But it's at the same time, the one person I met came to see me this is a long, long time ago in the late 1980s, before I even kind of moved to New Zealand, and I was teaching in Vancouver, and there was this guy showed up at the class, and he had a question. He said, I would like to ask a question about my meditation. And I said, oh, what kind of meditation are you doing? And he said, I'm doing Mahamudra. And this guy, I mean, he looked to me like someone whose mind was just all over the lot, so rather than, I said, well, what do you mean by Mahamudra? Because I wasn't sure that if he was practicing Mahamudra, then it's quite possible that this effortless flow, right, was something different than what I was thinking of. And he said, well, Mahamudra is where you just kind of hang out and let whatever happens happen. And I thought, no, actually, before you can hang out and let whatever happens happen, you probably have to do a lot of work. Right? So the thing is, it's like if the person is finding it difficult to do something, can you find something in that, they're considering it difficult to visualize. So is it possible to somehow be able to reflect back to them the fact that they're already been visualizing all their life. They just haven't called it that. Right? In other words, you're starting to see, no, you can do this. You can't get someone to do something they can't do and don't do. You can only get someone to do something they're doing. Teaching is a complete waste of time. Right? If you're successful, right, you're able, if you know, someone comes along and says, oh, that was very wise, that's amazing, that class. That's because you're amazing, and your mind is amazing to take that class and find it amazing. So the teacher goes, oh yeah, that was an amazing class. So there's too much detail to be able to respond to this, Brendan, in a really specific fashion. But it's a sense of like, can we not, we tend to think of effort, it goes along quite often, the heroic effort, and it has a sense of the challenge. You're going to have a challenge there. But I've come to suspect that actually in a much deeper sense, people don't so much respond positively to challenges, right? But they respond more positively to a sense of support, right? So it's actually important to begin our practice with something we feel we can do rather than beginning our practice with something we feel we can't do. There's a kind of an excitement about being able to do something and achieve something. Right? It's kind of banging our head against a brick wall, so to speak. Right? Now, it may be, for example, that, I understand, I empathize with this person who can't visualize. Because I was that person. And I couldn't visualize worth a bean. And yet I was in this incredibly difficult situation of studying with this teacher who was constantly giving out all these visualizations. And not only that, but knowing that I was going to do them. There was no doubt in my mind, I'm going to do 100,000 of every single thing, and yet at the same time, I couldn't do it, right? And so I had to kind of devise tricks for myself, right? And this is the difference between making your living, like grasping your living, taking it to hand and making it work. So I couldn't visualize, so I grasped my not being able to visualize and I made it work. And I told myself this really dumb story. I said, well, you see, because I was trying to visualize Chenrezig. Way back then, I was trying to visualize Chenrezig. And that kind of, what visualization meant to me was to have 100% crystal clear Tonka hanging in front of me when it wasn't in front of me. It had to be like somehow a kind of visual image that was just absolutely crisp and detailed and full and all that kind of stuff. So but I couldn't do it. I didn't see a thing. I just go, oh, Mani Padme Hung, and was focused on my knees aching. Oh, Mani Padme Hung, and my back hurt, and oh, Mani Padme Hung, and maybe it's time for lunch. It's like oh, Mani Padme Hung, and anything but a visualization of some four-armed white Buddha figure. So here's where the trick came. Thought, well, I know I'm going to do hundreds of thousands of this, but I can't persevere to do hundreds of thousands of this in a way that is unsuccessful and ineffective. I have to make it effective. So here's how I did it. I said, well, I'm choosing to close my eyes and therefore I can't see Chenrezig. But I know Chenrezig's there. Right? At the time I was living with a girlfriend and it wasn't difficult for me to apply it to her. We could be sitting in the room and I could close my eyes and it didn't feel like she disappeared. She still felt like she was there. I was too unsophisticated and undeveloped to realize that there's a tactile, kinesthetic sense in my body of the presence of another being. And I'm not sure if that's all I know of them actually. Right? But then I started to find that when I closed my eyes, I couldn't see Chenrezig, but I had a confidence that this presence of wisdom and compassion was there with me, that my mind started getting clearer and I started getting calmer and I started having positive effects out of this totally unsuccessful visualization. So, yeah, and then I started to get disturbed because my beautiful sort of experience was kind of sometimes jarred by crystal clear visions of Buddha figures. They came later, kind of thing, by accident when I wasn't expecting it. So the thing is that no one at the time was particularly encouraging me to do this. And I don't know if they had been encouraging me to do this, it would have been particularly useful. It was useful I discovered it myself. And what there is like there's a bit of confidence. I can make this work. So can we as teachers helping others, can we somehow interact with them in a way that gives them the courage to make their experience work for them, rather than sort of setting up some ideal of Chenrezig out there that you're supposed to visualize or fail at visualizing. Okay? And interestingly, in that confidence comes the competence, and with increasing competence comes the increasing confidence, and the parami start coming into being. I think I would like to stop at this point. It's just kind of another full morning. I reiterated this quote from the Visuddhimagga, and we began with this a number of classes back, and the Buddha's saying, "Who can untangle this tangle?" And he said, the being that's rooted in sila, samadhi, and prajna can untangle this tangle. And then the book unfolds, right, how to develop sila, samadhi, and prajna. And in the Mahayana tradition, sila got opened up into the 4 parami, right? It just was like, okay, let's expand this, let's have more detail, right? And so it was dana parami, like generosity, wholesome relating, patience, skilled use of energy. And then samadhi, right, is where we come to next. And the whole question of skillful meditation or contemplation comes in here. Right? And that's where we'll begin to explore together next time we meet, right, on these Sundays. One other small detail which many of you might have discovered, and that is that Stephen's been created a place on the YouTube sites that these classes can be posted up to for people who want to kind of review them again and look at them. And so I don't know the address, but actually if you just Google Green Dharma Treasury YouTube, you'll find it. And so it's just because there's quite a lot that happens in these classes, and some people will find it useful to perhaps to review. By the power of these wholesome activities, may our lives be rich with awakening. Living thus, may we abandon all unwholesomeness. In the very midst of this mystery of birth, illness, old age, and death, may we help all beings to realize their true interbeing, interknowing nature. Sarva Mangalam, Sarva Mangalam, Sarva Mangalam. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Be well wherever you are. Right? Good. Lovely to see you again.